Hello and welcome. My name is Patrick Tobin. I'm presenting the paper at DETA, a framework for detecting electricity theft attacks in smart grids. This class is Cyber Physical System Security, fall semester 2018. I'd like to credit the authors of the paper, all from the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, Varun Krishna, Kyung Lee, Gabriel Weaver, Ravi Shankar Iyer, and William Sanders. This paper was presented at the 46th Annual IEEE IFIP International Conference on Dependable Systems and Networks in Toulouse, France, and download links available here. The overview we'll be discussing today, some background of why this paper is so important, the author's approach in analyzing the problem of electrical theft, the attack model for what the attacker is looking to accomplish, the background around grid topology and the balance check that are relevant to the theft classifications and the proposal, and then a very deep dive into electricity theft attack classifications, followed by their theft detector proposal, an evaluation of theft detectors, and then my evaluation of the paper. So why is this paper important? Electricity theft is a major concern for utilities all over the world, and it leads to billions of dollars in losses every year. Although improving the communications capabilities between smart meters and utilities can enable many smart grid features and save utilities money, these communications can also be compromised in ways that allow an attacker to steal electricity. Such attacks have recently begun to occur, so there's a real and urgent need for a framework to defend against them. So, the loss magnitude. By the numbers, electrical theft is a major problem. A Bloomberg article indicated that in India, this theft contributes to blackouts and costs around $17 billion in lost revenue annually. So lost revenue not only from the theft itself, but the resulting costs of blackouts as a result. The World Bank indicated that electricity theft contributes to a loss in electric delivery of over 25% of all generated supply in India, 16% Brazil, 6% in China and the US, and 5% Australia. These numbers are very significant at a macro scale. And theft in these countries is almost always achieved by tapping into electric distribution lines, so the distribution network that leads to the consumer. Some background around smart meters and theft. So these smart meters are promising, but they're unfortunately not free of electrical theft incidents. The FBI recently reported that smart meter consumptions were being unreported in Puerto Rico, which led to around $400 million annually lost for the utility. Back in 2014, BBC reported that smart meters in Spain were being hacked to cut power bills. And given that smart meters can be compromised, the rollout efforts of utilities may only increase the attack surface for cyber intrusion-based theft methods. And some of our content in this class reflects that for sure. The approach. Our authors in this paper are concerned with attack detection and not prevention. So smart meters, they have encrypted communication capabilities and they have some tamper detection features. However, reliance on these mechanisms is not sufficient to ensure total defense against cyber intrusions that can exploit communication vulnerabilities. As the class mentions, these devices are in the field, they're close to customer premises, so there's a lot of opportunities to circumvent encrypted communications, smart grid protocols, as has been previously presented. And the assumption of the paper here is, conservatively, the attackers have managed to compromise the integrity of the smart meter consumption readings. The author's aim is to detect those attacks against data integrity. Now, in our attack model, we're looking at an attacker who's looking to profit off the grid or their neighbors. So they're an electricity consumer in the grid who's consuming more electricity than they pay for, or in terms of a buyback model with the utility, they're generating less than they're actually getting paid for. So they are profiting. And generally, they're looking to underreport their electrical demand, which is more common. So underreporting can be achieved by either compromising the integrity of the smart meter readings, or by tapping the electric power line immediately upstream of the smart meter. The grid topology and the balance check. Balance checks are implemented to detect electrical theft and have been, for a long time, even before smart meters. So, let's talk about the balance check. Most grid distribution topologies are radial, so they're represented as an unbalanced n-ary tree and representing the maximum number of consumers who are connected to a single node. And we have an illustration of this radial power network topology on the right-hand side. So the power to a consumer gets supplied from a single path from the distribution substation, which is the root node of this tree, or N1 here, all the way to, let's say, C1, which is the consumer. So with the active power, when analyzed, is additive. So the total average power that's supplied at a single node in the tree at time t is equal to the sum of all the average demands of all its child nodes at time t as well. So we're looking at the total average power coming from N1 being equal to all the demands of child nodes C1 through, L3 here. So the balance check in the industry is used to determine if readings add up correctly. It's performed at internal nodes called balance meters. If the readings do not add up correctly to this total average power, we know that there's been some fraud. So the authors went through a very thorough effort to identify 7 classes of attacks in this paper. So as mentioned previously, some of these attacks will fail the balance check. These are attack classes 1A through 3A, and some can circumvent it, attack classes 1B through 4B. And other classifications will actually include whether the attacks were possible using different electricity pricing schemes, which we'll get into in the next slide. So the authors here refer to the attacker as malicious Mallory, as sometimes in other security articles you'll see the evil Eve, etc. And some other terms that will be helpful for our discussion here have to do with pricing models from utilities. So flat rate pricing, this is when utilities offer a standard electrical rate, which may be set by a regulator. So this is a standard price per kilowatt hour. Time of use pricing, utilities offer time of use pricing to incentivize consumers to use energy in off-peak periods, and prices can vary according to this plan. So they may be more expensive in the evening, less expensive during the day, when consumers are less likely to use electricity. There'd be less demand on the grid. RTP is real-time pricing. Pricing is changed in a non-deterministic manner. It captures dynamic market trends in electricity demand and supply. So these can fluctuate based on how many generation facilities are up at the same time. With less generation facilities, the prices may increase. With more, they may decrease, etc. In ADR, automated demand response, these are most commonly devices that encourage consumers to adapt and change the signals by displaying the electricity price. So if the prices they're displaying become higher than an acceptable level from the consumer, then the consumer may want to reduce their usage here. So first, we're going to be discussing 3 types of attacks that can be detected using a balance check. So they are detected because the attacker is injecting false data only for their smart meter consumption readings, where the data from their neighbors is not changed here, so it will fail the balance check. And pricing signals have not been compromised under the flat rate pricing scheme. So first, in attack 1A, Mallory is consuming more electricity than is typical, but the readings reported back to the utility are unchanged. So a very large amount of electricity can be stolen here, because Mallory can use much more electricity than typical, but report a normal reading. In attack 2A, there's a more limited scope of theft here, because Mallory doesn't change her behavior, but reports much less usage back to the utility than was consumed to get a lower charge from the utility. So in attacks under time of use or real-time pricing schemes, where variable pricing is a factor, you can still accomplish attack classes 1A and 2A by underreporting your usage. They're still possible in this context. But time of use and real-time pricing opens a new attack class in which Mallory is not actually stealing any electricity, but reports that her consumption happened at a time when the price was low, when it actually happened at a time when the price was very high. This is also called an optimal swap attack. And it's not possible with a flat rate structure. So as mentioned, even though the attacker in this model here is able to compromise those smart meter readings back to the utility, these attacks would all be detected using a simple balance check. However, attack classes 1A, 2A, and 3A, the authors identify those as 1A, 2A, 1B, 2B, and 3B when the attacker is modifying the usage seen by their neighbors accordingly, so the balance check will be passed. So decreasing their usage reported back, increasing their usage reported back for their neighbors, downstream of the same node. So this would be something that would circumvent the balance check. Classes 1B, 2B, 3B. In attack class 4B, there's another attack class that can circumvent the balance check. Mallory will decrease her neighbor's demand by compromising their ADR interfaces. So they have to have automated demand response in this scenario. So she would affect the electricity price seen by her neighbors, causing them to decrease their usage, allowing her to increase her usage, and then send false readings back to utility for both herself and her neighbors, and pass that balance check. So we've discussed the potential types of electricity attacks here, and now let's move on to the theft detector proposal. So in the context of this paper, the detection method they're talking about is a centralized online algorithm that would run at the utilities control center and detect anomalies. So a lot of the mitigations we're going to discuss here are all statistical. We're looking at the data integrity and trying to statistically analyze it to determine anomalies. So as mentioned, the balance check will detect the attack methods 1A through 3A, so no algorithm is required here to detect these. However, the anomalies we'll be looking at will be either abnormally high consumptions, which may indicate the owner of the smart meter is a victim or neighbor of one of the attackers, or abnormally low consumptions, which would be reported under attack classes 2A, 2B, and are characteristic of the attacker. And as mentioned, attack class 3A and B involve load shifting from a period of high prices to a period of low prices. So one of the ways to determine that these anomalies exist are using one of the statistical methods is the ARIMA detector, the first detector proposed by the authors here. So this is single reading anomaly detection, and it's possible using an autoregressive integrated moving average model. And this is a first level check on the range of smart meter readings to detect, again, abnormally high or low consumption. So unfortunately, as we'll discuss in this slide, the authors identify a pretty quick escalation between, using statistical models to either get around detectors or to enable new ones. So the first item I'll note here is that the single reading anomaly detection can actually be beaten by two types of attacks that the authors will identify here. So the ARIMA detector is the detection method. The first attack that can beat it is notably the ARIMA attack. So if the researchers can do it, the attacker can also passively monitor their smart meter, build the same models of data that the ARIMA detector is using, and create confidence intervals for detection. So the attacker can beat this detector by ensuring that their attack vector or falsely reported readings lies within that confidence interval. And they can maximize their theft by setting their vector right at the ARIMA confidence threshold. Now, the ARIMA attack can be detected by the integrated ARIMA detector. So this is where the researchers will strike back at the attacker. And this places checks on the mean and variance of a set of readings. The attacker, but unfortunately, can also circumvent this detector with the integrated ARIMA attack, which will inject false readings in a way that the neighbor's readings are overreported, remaining within that confidence interval, and ensuring that the mean and variance of false readings don't exceed historical thresholds. So basically, our attacker and our detectors are using the same model to, either detect or remain undetected here. So as a result of all this, the authors found that the integrated ARIMA attack has beaten their first two detectors. But let's move on into attack class 3B and the optimal swap attack, which we discussed. So the integrated ARIMA detector exists, But unfortunately, the optimal swap attack doesn't actually affect the mean or the variance of readings in a day or the week, because the readings are all actual readings, they're just been switched on their temporal ordering. So this would not be detected by either of the detectors. So the authors identified the Kullback-Leibler divergence, or KLD detector, which compares the distribution of a set of measurements against the distribution of a baseline model, which is ideal for detecting the integrated REMA attack because it detects the change in the consumption pattern distributions that are caused by the attack, both for the attacker and the attacker's neighbors. So when evaluating the theft detectors, they're looking at two metrics here. First of which is the percentage of consumers for which the attack was successfully detected. It also includes the neighbors whose power was stolen. And metric 2 is the maximum amount of electricity that can be stolen and monetary profit if the attack goes undetected. So this can also be attained without actually stealing electricity, as we talked about in attack class 3. And this is something utilities are very concerned about, reducing the losses here. One of the major strengths of this paper is the data set used. So the data set is the largest publicly available smart meter study in existence, collected by Ireland's Commission for Energy Regulation. And it's comprised of anonymized collection of smart meter readings from consumers, collected at a half-hour time resolution for a period of up to 74 weeks. So a significant amount of data at very specific intervals. And there's a set of 500 consumers in the data set, split between residential consumers, medium enterprises, and a small, very small subset of unclassified consumers. So let's dive into the results here. So using the data set, the authors attempted statistically to do the integrated ARIMA or optimal swap attacks, basically manipulating the data to match what the attackers would do. And here are the following results. So for attack class 1A or B, as mentioned, this is where the attacker is using as much power as they want, but they're still reporting normal amounts of usage. The ARIMA detector and integrated ARIMA detector both failed to detect these attacks. And the KLD detector was able to detect the attack for 91 and 94% of consumers at 5 and 10% significance levels. And the attacker profit, so the attackers who were able to evade the KLD detector, their profits were limited to only 0.6% of the original value. For attack class 2A or 2B, this is where the attacker is using a normal amount of power but reporting less usage. The ARIMA detector failed here. The integrated ARIMA detector was only able to detect 10% of these attacks, but the KLD detector performed far better, detected at 64 and 82% of consumers at 5 and 10% significance levels, and their profit was limited to only 9% of the original value stolen. In class 3, this is again the optimal swap attack. ARIMA and integrated ARIMA, it's not possible to detect what's going on here for optimal swap, but the KLD detector still was able to detect the attack for 74 and 82% of consumers. And as mentioned here by the authors, the attacker profit is not significant or really worth the effort at only $14.30 per week. So it's a lot of statistical attack work to only make $14 a week. So in conclusion, the authors were able to show that their KLD detector was able to address the problems indicated by the need for reducing the electrical theft attacks and all the new 7 classes of attacks they identified. So in terms of strengths, the authors did develop a very comprehensive classification of attacks within the data integrity attacks and the distribution system. And a major strength as well is relying on this public, real-world, and large-scale, actual real data, smart meter data set to devise a data-driven detection mechanism to mitigate the attacks that they identified. So the study is now repeatable and extendable by other researchers. Some weaknesses, the authors early in the paper identified attack class 4B, which is introduced, and it could be highly effective given that you're still changing the behavior of your neighbors, but it was not later addressed, as the authors said they did not have any data to support an ADR-based system. So they indicated that in order to study it, they would need to make a lot of assumptions about how each consumer changes consumption in response to the changes in real-time electricity prices. So real data could be gathered once available. It's understood there, but they should have pulled it back, addressed how this also could be potentially addressed by their detectors. It really was left open-ended. And another weakness to the paper potentially was the attack model. So the scope includes the attacker who they quote is now an insider in the system, and either the smart meter or the communications link has been compromised. So they don't acknowledge that there's potential alternate threat vectors if there's an attacker within the distribution system. So they may be able to pivot all the way to potential utility billing systems to compromise the data integrity there. That's another place they could reduce the prices they pay to utility and profit off that. In terms of next steps, as mentioned in the weaknesses, they're more of potential future work here. So the authors could develop a framework for detecting attack class 4B. As they indicated, they would probably have to gather and analyze data from consumers using an ADR system to determine how those consumers would react to changing prices. Just because that attack class has not been addressed, is how or what method could respond to it or mitigate it. And then finally, address, as mentioned, the detections for attackers who can compromise billing system data integrity within the utility's business network, outside of just focusing on systems between the AMI head end and the customer. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for watching.